Hi, I'm Rashonda Kate. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading The House Behind the Cedars by Charles Chesnutt. We're on chapter 31. The title of the chapter is In Deep Waters. Are we going to make it through the whole thing? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. Let's get started and see. Chapter 31, In Deep Waters. Rena was usually fatigued at the close of her school on Wednesday afternoon. Rena was unusually fatigued at the close of her school on Wednesday afternoon. She had been troubled all day with a headache, which, beginning with a dull pain, had gradually increased in intensity until every nerve was throbbing like a trip hammer. The pupils seemed unusually stupid. A discouraging sense of the insignificance of any part she could perform towards the education of 3 million people with a school term of 2 months a year hung over her spirit like a pall. I bet it did. They seemed particularly stupid on this day, and she's like, I only get 2 months a year. What am I supposed to do about the 3 million Black people who need education? I can see how that would be overwhelming. As the object of Wayne's attentions, she had begun to feel somewhat like a wild creature who hears the pursuers on its track and has the fear of capture added to the fatigue of flight. But when this excitement had gone too far and had neared the limit of exhaustion, came Tryon's letter with the resulting surprise and consternation. Rena had keyed herself up to a heroic pitch to answer it, but when the inevitable reaction came, she was overwhelmed with a sickening sense of her own weakness. The things which in another sphere had constituted her strength and shield were now her undoing, and exposed her to dangers from which they lent her no protection. Not only was this her position in theory, but the pursuers were already at her heels. As the day wore on, these dark thoughts took on an added gloom until, when the hour to dismiss school arrived, she felt as though she had not a friend in the world. This feeling was accentuated by a letter which she had that morning received from her mother, in which Miss Molly spoke very highly of Wayne and plainly expressed the hope that her daughter might like him so well that she would prefer to remain in Sampson County. Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. Not? Oh my gosh, I just did not. That is something I very rarely do, and here you get it from me today. Plato, bright-eyed and alert, was waiting in the schoolyard until the teacher should be ready to start. Having warned away several smaller children who had hung around after school as though to share his prerogative of accompanying the teacher, Plato had swung himself into the low branches of an oak at the edge of the clearing, from which he was hanging by his legs, head downward. He dropped from this reposeful attitude when the teacher appeared at the door and took his place at her side. A premonition of impending trouble caused the teacher to hesitate. She wished that she had kept more of the pupils behind. Something whispered that danger lurked in the road she customarily followed. Plato seemed insignificantly small and weak, and she felt miserably unable to cope with any difficult or untoward situation. Plato, she suggested, I think we'll go round the other way tonight, if you don't mind. Visions of Marse George disappointed of $1 unearned and unspent flitted through the narrow brain which someone, with the irony of ignorance or of knowledge, had mocked with the name of a great philosopher. Plato was not an untruthful lad, but he seldom had the opportunity to earn $1. His imagination, spurred on by the instinct of self-interest, rose to the emergency. I's feared you might get snake bit gwine round that way, Miss Rena. My brother Jim killed a water moccasin down there yesterday, about 10 feet long. Rena had a horror of snakes, with which the swamp by which the other road ran was infested. Snakes were a vivid reality. Her presentiment was probably a mere depression of spirits due to her condition of nervous exhaustion. A cloud had come up and threatened rain, and the wind was rising ominously. The old way was the shorter. She wanted above all to get to Elder Johnson's and go to bed. Oh, how did I lose my place that fast? Perhaps sleep would rest her tired brain. She could not imagine herself feeling worse unless she should break down altogether. She plunged into the path and hastened forward so as to reach home before the approaching storm. So completely was she absorbed in her own thoughts that she scarcely noticed that Plato himself seemed preoccupied. Instead of capering along like a playful kitten or puppy, he walked by her side unusually silent. When they had gone a short distance and were approaching a path which intersected their road at something near a right angle, the teacher missed Plato. He had dropped behind a moment before. Now he had disappeared entirely. Her vague alarm of a few moments before returned with redoubled force. Plato, she called, Plato. There was no response, save the sighing of the wind through the swaying treetops. She stepped hastily forward, wondering if this were some childish prank. If so, it was badly timed, and she would let Plato feel the weight of her displeasure. Her forward step had brought her to the junction of the two paths, where she paused doubtfully. The route she had been following was the most direct home, but led for quite a distance through the forest, which she did not care to traverse alone. The intersecting path would soon take her to the main road, where she might find shelter or company or both. Glancing around again in search of her missing escort, she became aware that a man was approaching her from each of the two paths. In one, she recognized the eager and excited face of George Tryon, flushed with anticipation of their meeting, and yet grave with uncertainty of his reception. Advancing confidently along the other path, she saw the face of Jeff Wayne, drawn, as she imagined in her anguish, with evil passions which would stop at nothing. She is at a literal crossroads with the intersecting streets and a figurative crossroads with her two amours, neither of which she wants, advancing toward her. Could this be a better scene from a movie? I think not. What should she do? There was no sign of Plato, so she is looking for salvation from like this 10-year-old boy. Is he 10? I don't know. Oh, Rena. What should she do? There was no sign of Plato. For aught she could see or hear of him, the earth might have swallowed him up. Some deadly serpent might have stung him. Some wandering rabbit might have tempted him aside. Another thought struck her. Plato had been very quiet. There had been something on his conscience. Perhaps he had betrayed her. But to which of the two men? And to what end? Dun, dun, dun. The problem was too much for her overwrought brain. She turned and fled. A wiser instinct might have led her forward. In the two conflicting dangers, she might have found safety. The road, after all, was a public way. Any number of persons might meet there accidentally, but she saw only the darker side of the situation. To turn to Tryon for protection before Wayne had by some overt act manifested the evil purpose for which she as yet only suspected would be, she imagined, to acknowledge a previous secret acquaintance with Tryon, thus placing her reputation at Wayne's mercy, and to charge herself with a burden of obligation toward a man whom she wished to avoid and had refused to meet. Okay, she can't run to Tryon because then Wayne will figure out that there was something afoot between them. Plus, she didn't want to run to Tryon anyway because she had refused to meet him. And in all of his white male privilege, he has decided, you gonna meet with me today. All right. If, on the other hand, she should go forward to meet Wayne, he would undoubtedly offer to accompany her homeward. Tryon would inevitably observe the meeting and suppose it prearranged. Not for the world would she have him think so. Why she should care for his opinion, she did not stop to argue. So if she turns to Wayne, one, she's going to be making Wayne think she wants to hang out with him, and he will definitely be like, I am walking you all the way home, and she doesn't want that drama in her life right now. And two, she doesn't want Tryon to think that she had Wayne show up to save her from him because she doesn't even like Wayne, but why should she care about what Tryon thinks in the first place? She turned and fled, and to avoid possible pursuit, struck into the underbrush. She dove under a bush. What? Let's read that again. She turned and fled, and to avoid possible pursuit, struck into the underbrush at an angle which she calculated would bring her in a few rods to another path, which would lead quickly into the main road. She had run only a few yards when she found herself in the midst of a clump of prickly shrubs and briars. I am sure she did. Meantime, the storm had burst. I had forgotten it was about to rain. Of course, it's going to rain. Meantime, the storm had burst. The rain fell in torrents. Extricating herself from the thorns, she pressed forward, but instead of coming out upon the road, found herself penetrating deeper and deeper into the forest. Oh my. So she's getting lost in a forest. She's got a tumble of shrubs and briars stuck all probably in her hair and on her clothes, and it is pouring down rain. Oh. Maybe we can finish this. The storm increased in violence. The air grew darker and darker. It was near evening. The clouds were dense. The thick woods increased the gloom. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning pierced the darkness, followed by a sharp clap of thunder. There was a crash of falling timber. Terror-stricken, Rena flew forward through the forest, the underbrush growing closer and closer as she advanced. Suddenly, the earth gave way beneath her feet and she sank into a concealed morass. By clasping the trunk of a neighboring sapling, she extricated herself with an effort and realized with a horrible certainty that she was lost in the swamp. So she just fell into a morass in the swamp. I am thinking of the scene from The Princess Bride where Princess Buttercup goes down into the quicksand, and she realizes with a horrible certainty she was lost in the swamp. Are there ROUSs in the swamp? If you are not familiar with The Princess Bride, an ROUS is a rodent of unusual size. Are there snakes in the swamp? We already know there are snakes in the swamp. What else might be in the swamp? Is there fire that just randomly starts? Okay, this is a whole Princess Bride thing that I was not expecting to happen for me right now. If you've never watched The Princess Bride, I recommend that you watch it. I do not recommend that you read the book. I've read the book. It is dry and long. And I can hang with a long book, but it is long. And that Rob Reiner and whoever else wrote The Princess Bride with him extricated all of the good parts, because those parts did happen in the book, extricated all of the good parts from that long and dry book and made one of my favorite movies. Kudos to y'all. But back to Rena in the swamp. Turning, she tried to retrace her steps. A flash of lightning penetrated the gloom around her, and barring her path, she saw a huge black snake. Harmless enough, in fact, but to her excited imagination, frightful in appearance. With a wild shriek, she turned again, staggered forward a few yards, stumbled over a projecting root, and fell heavily to the earth. When Rena had disappeared in the underbrush, Tryon and Wayne each had instinctively set out in pursuit of her, but owing to the gathering darkness, the noise of the storm, and the thickness of the underbrush, they missed not only Rena, but each other, and neither was aware of the other's presence in the forest. Wayne kept up the chase until the rain drove him to shelter. Tryon, after a few minutes, realized that she had fled to escape him, and that to pursue her would be to defeat rather than promote his purpose. Yeah, I get that, but she's fleeing in the middle of a swamp. Like, maybe she's going to need some assistance. He desisted, therefore, and returning to the main road, stationed himself at a point where he could watch Elder Johnson's house, and having waited for a while without any signs of Rena, concluded that she had taken refuge in some friendly cabin. Turning homeward disconsolately as night came on, he intercepted Plato on his way back from town and pledged him to inviolable secrecy so effectually that Plato, when subsequently questioned, merely answered that he had stopped a moment to gather some chinkapins, and when he had looked around, the teacher was gone. Rena, not appearing at supper time nor for an hour later, the elder, somewhat anxious, made inquiries about the neighborhood, and finding his guest at no place where she might be expected to stop, became somewhat alarmed. Wayne's house was the last to which he went. He had surmised that there was some mystery connected with her leaving Wayne's, but had never been given any definite information about the matter. In response to his inquiries, Wayne expressed surprise, but betrayed a certain self-consciousness which did not escape the elder's eye. Returning home, he organized a search party from his own family and several near neighbors and set out with dogs and torches to scour the woods for the missing teacher. I mean, you've got to use your resources. Dogs can sniff, torches will help you see. But wow, doesn't this sound like a slave hunt? Ooh, wait. Let's see. A couple of hours later, they found her lying unconscious in the edge of the swamp, only a few rods from a well-defined path which would soon have led her to the open highway. Strong arms lifted her gently and bore her home. Mrs. Johnson undressed her and put her to bed, administering a homely remedy of which whiskey was the principal ingredient to counteract the effects of the exposure. There was a doctor within 5 miles, but no one thought of sending for him, nor was it at all likely that it would have been possible to get him for such a case at such an hour. Okay, that's a little like forewarning right there. We could have gotten her a doctor, but for such a case at such an hour, that wasn't going to happen. And probably because she was Black and blah, blah, blah. Let's keep that in mind. Rena's illness, however, was more deeply seated than her friends could imagine. A tired body, in sympathy with an overwrought brain, had left her peculiarly susceptible to the nervous shock of her forest experience. The exposure for several hours in her wet clothing to the damps and miasma of the swamp had brought on an attack of brain fever. The next morning, she was delirious. One of the children took word to the schoolhouse that the teacher was sick and there would be no school that day. A number of curious and sympathetic people came in from time to time and suggested various remedies, several of which old Mrs. Johnson, with Catholic impartiality, administered to the helpless teacher, who from delirium gradually sunk into a heavy stupor scarcely distinguishable from sleep. It was predicted that she would probably be well in the morning. If not, it would then be time to consider seriously the question of sending for a doctor. So that is the end of chapter 31 in The House Behind the Cedars by Charles Chesnutt. I am Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda.